The day he brought the egg to Sunspear, the city wore the color of sleep. Heat lay low like a cat against the stones, the sea whispering its old salt stories under a sky drained of blue, and the shadow city stretched its long limbs and yawned smoke from its ovens and tannery fires. Oberyn Martell slipped through it as a man passes through recollections, pausing when a scent caught him. The resin of fresh pitch, dates mashed with almond warm bronze, then moving on without looking back. The egg rode in a wooden coffer wrapped with damp silk, the hinges quiet as a secret. It was heavier than its size promised. When the boy he had hired to carry it faltered, Oberyn took the handle himself, and a plume of the coffer's cool breath ghosted over his knuckles before the silk settled again. He had blood under one fingernail from the last turn of the journey, a cut he did not remember making. Blood found ways into everything. He did not mind. He walked the sand-choked alleys where the potters kept their kills and the fortune wives their braided ropes of charms. A man was mending a net, thumb and forefinger quick and deft, the lines pulling into a mesh like a thought forming. A girl watched a green lizard gulp a fly and laughed without covering her mouth. A baker's boy padded past with his tray of breads balanced on his shoulder and nodded at the prince he recognized, then looked back at his own feet, because princes moved like storms in Dorne, and wise folk, even friendly ones, read the sky before they spoke. Oberyn felt the city's old shiver pass through him, the memory of a long ago Queen's fleet running dry on the sand, the past landing like a black bird on each roof. Nymeria's tomorrow had begun here. Some tomorrows came with sails and steel. Some came in quiet coffers locked with 3 small hooks and no key one could cut. He turned his face up to the spear tower and smiled to see it wearing its shadow like a dark scarf against the light. The Dornish sun had stripped bleached bones from better men, but stone endured. And some things were older than the sun, though it had taken him hard years to find one and harder still to bring it home. Areo Hoda was waiting at the sea gate, as predictable as dawn and as patient. He had already set the guards to look the other way and the servants to pretend they had never been born. There was no noise on the stair but the whisper of Oberyn's sandaled feet and the silk-wrapped coffer bumping his thigh. Thump, thump, a sly heartbeat. "Your brother waits," Hoda said, voice like a spear haft sliding in calloused hands. "He always does," Oberyn said, and took Hoda's measure as one might the distance of a throw. Hoda's dark gaze did not stray to the coffer. He was the best of the dullards, and Oberyn trusted the dullards most. It was not an insult in his mind. Stone does not pretend to be river. They crossed into the spear tower's coolness and moved through a small door, a smaller passage, and a room with walls that remembered old fires. When Oberyn set the coffer down onto the black table in the center, there was an order in him that stilled his hands. He wiped the blood from beneath his nail, the taste of iron, the taste of childhood scrapes and 1,000 duels. He did not yet open the lid. Dorne came alone. The Prince of Dorne had the patience of mountains and the sickness of winters. He had learned in pain the cost of hurrying and spent his days measuring his breaths as a miser counts coins. He looked at his brother, at the coffer, at Hoda, and something cramped his mouth before it smoothed again. "You brought me another scandal," Dorne said. "I could hear it skipping up the stair." "I brought you a song," Oberyn said. He touched the coffer, then drew back his fingers as if the wood were warmer than the air. "You do not like scandal. I do not like silence. Do you remember the water gardens when we were small? The way the children's voices lifted when they caught sight of the sea? It sounded like this in my head all the way from Volantis. It would not shut up." "Songs have words," Dorne said, approaching the black table the way a prudent man approaches a cliff's edge. "Not too near, not too far. What does this one say?" Oberyn unhooked the 3 small catches. The silk parted, reluctant, and the egg showed itself, heavy and strange as a storm cloud caught and turned to stone. It was no larger than the head of a desert lion, scaled in black and red as if embers had scabbed over old obsidian. The light from the room's slit windows spilled across its curve and found nothing to hold. It drank light. The smell of it, there was a smell, was not sulfur or smoke. It was the dry scent of river stone heated after rain, the hint of something long buried and unburied. a ghost of cinnamon and char and iron. It had its own weather. Doran's eyes did not move away. His face emptied itself of speech. He had learned that trick early, and it served him now. He reached, stopped, let his hand fall. "A fraud," he said without tone. "They make them to cheat old Valentine men of their pulse of coin." "I did not buy this to cradle a Valentine's dream," Oberyn said. His voice dropped, and Hoda took a half step back, although no spear was raised. "I stole it." Doran's glance flicked up at that, a star flaring behind cloud. From a ship that did not belong to the man who thought it did. Upon a river that belonged to no man but to 39 gods who all take their turns drowning fools. It came from further east than the deepest dreams and lists. It came through more hands than a courtesan's coin. It would have been broken for charms if I had not taken it. He remembered the night, the oars muffled with lambskin, the way the river stank of silt and perfume, the moment the simple lock parted under slender iron and persuasion. He remembered the boatman's song and the woman with 3 rings in her ear who had sold him a name for a second name and a third set of lies. "It is not a fraud. They have cracked open dragon eggs before," Doran said, and now the words were careful stones he placed between them. "Septon Barth wrote about it. All came to ash and grief. Your blood is a rogue. It seeks other rogues. It makes companions of ruin and calls them friends. All men are cracked," Oberyn said. "Some hold wine, some hold venom, some hold fire. This one holds a possibility. I will break it or it will break itself. But it will not become a trinket in a Lycine's cabinet of wonders. Dorn is not a cabinet. This is madness. Madness has built more kingdoms than patience," Oberyn said, not unkindly. "Do I have your silence?" Doran looked at him a long time, and in that regard was the old game they had played on the sand as boys, each dragging a line with a stick and watching the sea's thin tongues lick toward it. Whose line would be swallowed first? Whose would remain? Doran's line always sat a little higher up the shore than Oberyn's. He preferred it that way. "You place me where you always place me," Doran said. "I am a wall and you are wind. If I speak, you blow my words away. If I say nothing, you fill the silence with yourself. Take your toy to the cellars. Hoda will see to it that you have what you need to waste our stores of coal. If it becomes more than a toy, I will kill you with my own hands, and our sister will call for my head and Dorn will fall to pieces like a clay cup kicked into shards by a mule. Will that content you?" "I like that you still threaten me," Oberyn said. "It makes me feel loved. You mistake concern for affection. I mistake nothing. I want both." He covered the egg again, and it seemed to him the room breathed relief. "You will not tell anyone." Doran said nothing, which in the language of the spear tower was consent. Hoda's hand tightened on his spear. Oberyn smiled at him with teeth. "If you stand guard long enough," he said to the Norvashi, "you may witness a story. I hope you are not superstitious." Hoda said, "I have seen worse things than stories." Oberyn took the coffer in his arms and went down where the tower went down into older stone, its steps worn to the shape of flight by feet-long dust. The air cooled and then warmed again as they reached a room the builders had abandoned when the tower had more ambition than manpower. He had set the braziers here days ago by letter, with orders couched as if for storing wine. He made the nest of iron and sand and damp cloth as one makes a cradle for a child one does not entirely trust. When he set the egg in the hollow and laid coals around it, he could feel the way it wanted the heat, the way a thirsty man wants the resistance of a wineskin between his hands. He set his palm upon it. It was cold. It would be hot. He understood wanting. He understood patience when it had a mouth. "Leave me," he told Hoda. "Do you know what you are doing?" Hoda asked, without sarcasm, without flattery, only with the curiosity of a man who has watched an unexpected door open and wonders what lies in its dark. "No," Oberyn said, and felt the joy of that truth. "But I know how to learn a thing with my hands. I know how to stand beside a foolishness until it decides to be a marvel." Hoda took his spear and his predictable steps and left. When the door shut, Oberyn bent his head until his mouth brushed the shell. He spoke to it in a language that had not been his mother's or his nurse's but had lodged in him like a barbed hook. His high Valyrian, learned in beds and libraries and ships, softened by laughter, sharpened by spite. He told it a poem he had once heard in a Volantine bathhouse, broken into verses like scales. He told it a lie his grandmother had told him about foxes that pretended to be fruit until a child plucked them. He told it the story of a city that would not bend and a river that would not rise to drown it. He told it his name, told him nothing. When Ellaria came, he watched the egg through her eyes first. She had seen him in many states of undress, bloody, laughing, slick with sweat, drowsy with wine. But she had never seen him like this, kneeling like a penitent on the warm stone of his own secrets. She stood at the threshold for a time, not to be coy but to taste the air, and then came to him without question. "This is the thing that has kept you from my bed," she said, sitting with her skirts arranged over her ankles in a way that made her look like a saint from a Roynish tile, fingers folded over one knee. "It is not a thing," Oberyn said. "It is a promise. You sell promises for kisses. You buy them with knives," she said. "You and promises make poor companions." But there was something soft on her mouth as she leaned over the egg. He saw the moment it took her, not belief but attention. "Ah," she said quietly. "It hums. You hear it." He had thought he imagined that subtle thrumming that did not come from the coals. It was low, a pressure behind the ears, a tone too slow to sing. "I feel it in my teeth," Ellaria said, smiling at him. "As if I have pressed my tongue to a coin someone has heated in a candle." "Oberyn, this is an old thing." She reached out as if to touch, stopped with her fingers curled above the shell. "It will take a great deal from us. Then we will give it," he said, and she turned her face to him the way the heads of statues turn in churches when one's back is to them. "An art, a trick, a revelation. You have always been good at burning down what keeps other men safe," she said. "But we live in rooms within rooms, my prince. Some roofs must remain. Some doors must be barred. Doors are for opening, not to strangers who chew the threshold," she said, and laughed softly so he would not draw blood with his retort. "I will help you feed it. It will need no nurse." He meant to sound light and failed. "I do not know if feeding is wise yet." "I did not say I would help you feed it food," Ellaria said. She remembered the coals. "Heed it, watch it, name it without naming it, for names are bonds and bonds make claims." She laid her palm on his knee, and he felt her pulse pass into him and down into the stone. "And when it wakes, as you hope it will, what then? Then I will be something I have never been," Oberyn said. "And Dorne will be something it has not dared to be for a long time." "Free," she said. "It has never been unfree," he said fiercely. "But it has learned to pretend it is content with its chains. Free again to speak aloud the words we whisper when we are sure the ravens are deaf." "King's words," Ellaria said. "Oberyn, your brother." "My brother knows words," he said. "He collects them as some men collect scars. He will find new ones for this. He always does. He will call me a fool, and I am not quite that. He will call me a monster, but I am only a man." He looked at the egg until his eyes watered and the red and black scales blurred. "This will be my answer to the kind of men who make children scream and call that governance. This will be my answer to history. The world is too used to listening to Northmen's boots and Reachmen's harvests. Let it hear another sound." "A dragon," Ellaria said, as if tasting a fig she feared might be black inside. "And control," he laughed. "There is no control," he said. "There is only hunger, and whether one feeds it bread or stones." Ellaria stayed into the deep part of night, the part that feels like sleep even to men who cannot sleep. She spoke to the egg as she would to a stubborn lover, in murmurs, lapsing from scold to song. She did not ask for promises, and that endeared her to Oberyn again. He would have married her if marriage were anything but a way to trap women into the shapes of men's expectations. She brought him water when he forgot to drink and reminded him when the braziers needed tending. Her presence steadied the room, like the sea at the horizon holding the sky in place. News did not pass through Dorne so much as it settled in the lungs of the people and was breathed out slow. Oberyn did not tell the sand snakes. He did not need to. Obara found her way to the door with a spear under her arm. Impatient steps dulled with effort. She stood, arms bracketed, glaring at the egg as if it were a rival wrestler. "If it bites you, I will bite it back," she said, which was as much permission as she had ever given anything. Nymeria came swathed in silk and smiles and accepted it instantly as something she had always known. "You have stolen our family a song," she said, touching her wrist to the shell, her bracelets clinking. "I will teach it to dance." Tyene folded herself beside it and prayed in a voice too soft to hear, or perhaps she only moved her lips to remind herself she had a mouth. When she lifted her eyes, they were already brimmed with secrets. "We will be good," she told the egg. "We will try our best." It sounded like a promise to herself, not to it. Sarella came from Old Town with a weather-stained cloak and an armful of books held as if they were cats, and she did not speak at all for a long while. Her eyes went every place Oberyn's had gone, learning the room and the heat and the flame and the way the shell refracted light where it should have merely reflected it. Then she asked him questions that made him irritated because they did not allow him to vagueness. He gave her answers he had not known he possessed and loved her in that moment more than he loved the egg. "You cannot hatch a dragon in a cold place," she said, sipping from his water without asking, because she had never asked. "Some texts say you must make a sacrifice. Most men think they know what that word means." "I am not most men," Oberyn said. "I know," Sarella said. "That is the problem and the solution." He fed the braziers. He brought the egg into the mornings and back into the afternoons and the low blue hours that come just before dawn when time feels like it has pulled a blanket over its head. He forgot to sleep. He remembered to watch. He coaxed the night smoke to linger on the shell. He laid it on warm sand dampened with brine. He set it near the stone where the desert sun came through one narrow slit of window and laid a blade of light across everything beneath as if it would cut to the heart if it could. On the 7th evening from its arrival, a wind came in from the sea that had not been invited, and it sniffed out every crack in Sunspear's stones and set the tapestries moving as if they'd grown lungs. Oberyn lay on his side on the floor, eyes useless as smudges, hand on the curve of the shell as he had found himself doing when he wished it dreams. He felt, rather than heard, the smallest sound a living thing can make. A catch, a click, the suggestion of fracture. He held perfectly still so his bones would not frighten it. Ilaria had fallen asleep with her head on his stomach. She woke and held her breath with him, the kind of holding that becomes faith by accident. Another sound, then a third, as if a thin blade were tapping a stone from inside a fruit. "Come on, little thing," Oberyn murmured, scarcely daring words. "Come on, coward. I have given you every comfort mortal hands can make. Earn it." He did not say it loudly enough for anyone but the egg to hear. Perhaps because his voice fell into that deep well of ours, perhaps because there are moments words resist speech. No one else came until he called for them much later. In that private world, there was only the sound of hatches opening. Not a crack in the shell so much as an unmaking, scales shifting aside to invite the new. The smell came first. Not smoke and not sulfur, but the smell a forge has when its bellows are just beginning to stir, the suggestion of a throat warming for a song. The shells curved side apart, a seam appearing like a smile in dark stone. A sharp point slid out, black wet. It was so small that Oberyn had to laugh, which made Ilaria cough. Him because laughter breaks spells, and now was not the time. The creature spilled itself into the cradle of iron and cloth. It looked wrong for a moment, clumsy, unfinished, as if the making of it had been interrupted as a potter's apprentice interrupts his master by dropping a jar. But then it righted itself with the stubbornness of things meant by the world. Wings unfolded and shook like soaked silk, throwing droplets that hissed and vanished on the coals. The skin between the ribs of those wings was the translucent red of old wine held to the light. It filled its small chest and made a noise that was not a cry and not a cough but a demand. Oberyn's eyes stung. He did not bother to pretend the sting was smoke. He slid his hand under the creature and lifted it with the steadiness he did not always show men. It was warm but not hot. It was heavy for its size. Its eyes opened. They were amber now, not the color they would be later, and they fixed on him with a hatred he recognized from his own mirror and with an absolute lack of fear. "Hello?" he said to it, and to the room, and to his own life, which seemed to tilt and pour itself forward like a jug. "I am Oberyn." It found the pulse at his wrist as if that were a language it had been taught, and it bit him without malice, and he bled into its mouth and it swallowed. Ilaria hissed, but did not move to stop it. There would be blood. Blood always found a way. When it lifted its head the second time, something like smoke ribboned from its nostrils and hung in the air like the memory of a song. Its scales were the color of the egg from which it had clawed its way, black mottled with dark red, each lancelet of scale edged delicately as an eyelash. Its belly was a paler color, the pink-gray of a child's gums. Its claws were needles, its tail already spiteful. He thought of names as one thinks of kisses one has not had yet. He thought of the desert's murderous winds that come at noon, and of the whispering that snakes make under the sand, like silk being folded. "I will not call you by a name a dead Valyrian would recognize," he told it, "because men make sentences to define their courage." He offered it the tip of his thumb again, and it did not bite this time. It sat in his palm and blinked and made a small sound like a kettle ready to boil. "You are Xerix," he said at last, feeling the heat of the syllables in his mouth. "You are what lives where men think only heat lives." It hissed. The hiss sounded like approval, not because it was, but because he needed it to be. He fed it slivers of meat from the lamb Ilaria had anticipated for him and brought wrapped under her shawl, because Ilaria Sand believed in inevitable things, and one of those was hunger. Chewed like a prince. It spit out what it did not want onto Oberyn's knee. It crawled up his forearm and fixed its claws into his sleeve when he stood with it. "Shall I fetch the world?" Ilaria asked softly. "Fetch my daughters," he said. "Fetch my brother if he wishes his heart to continue its cautious beating. Fetch Ario that he may learn we can be surprised without dying. Fetch the kitchens and tell them to be ready to feed the sun." The first week was a fight between need and sense. Xerix wanted heat and meat, and it wanted Oberyn's voice and Ilaria's hands and the smell of the braziers. It scorned bowls. It fled from being set down and then demanded the space to stretch its hind legs, which were already plotting their first leaps. It slept like an old soldier, absolutely, as if he had switched it off. It woke as if it had been listening to him missing it. It singed the edge of his hair, and he laughed. It snapped at Tyenne's finger and then brooded, offended by some slight he could not trace. It walked into Nymeria's necklaces and tangled itself and hissed at the jewels as if they were enemies. Obara held it in her big careless hands as she would hold a dangerous child. It bit her once and she laughed back at it and bit it on the back with a quick press of teeth that did not break the skin, and the creature stilled. It knew a challenge when it felt one. It watched Sorella's pen. It watched Ario's spear. When the Norvashi, not without bravery, held that spear out for it to inspect, Xerix sniffed down its length and sneezed, and a bead of fire popped from its mouth like a seed, landed on the oil-smooth shaft, and left a black kiss before winking. Ario looked at the mark as if the spear had learned to speak. Doran came, as he had promised he would, and for a time he was a man who had discovered an extra beat in his own pulse. He did not speak to the creature. He spoke to his feet, perhaps, or to his bones, telling them to behave. He watched Oberyn the way a father watches a son climbing a cliff face without a rope. Oberyn could not tell if he was ready to applaud or ready to walk away to spare himself the sight. "How many men have died following dragons?" Doran said at last, when other words would not suffice. "How many kings set their crowns on fire for the vanity of riding heat?" "I am not those men," Oberyn said, "and this is not that time. You say that as if saying it makes it true." "I say it until it becomes true," Oberyn said, and Xerix flicked his tongue as if tasting the argument. "Do not mistake me. I am not wise, but I am not a fool, and the difference has saved me." "You brought a weapon into my house," Doran said, finally looking at the tiny black and red thing that had already learned the corners of the room and now was plotting the distance between two braziers. "If it lives, it will become a bigger weapon." I have had to live my life with other men's weapons pointed at me. I would have chosen comfort had I had the choosing. Comfort rusts the joints, Oberyn said softly. It makes men kind. It makes men cruel. It makes them content with what they should break. Dorne has been comfortable too long, brother. It grieves in long sighs. It calls those sighs wisdom. We breed children who go north to die to prove that we still have a place in other men's songs. He looked at his own hands, one nicked and one clean. I mean to change the song. I mean to be more dangerous than the Reach thinks we are and more merciful than King's Landing can imagine. You will be dead by next winter, Doran said with a well-worn sadness. And I will have to call that justice. I will not enjoy it. I know, Oberyn said. It sat between them like a friend. You should not enjoy it. But I will not be dead. Xerix grew like a rumor, quickly and unevenly. There were days he seemed nothing more than a dark worm with ambitions. His limbs too long for the rest of him, his wings absurd. There were mornings Ilaria found him asleep in the ashes, a pair of slow breaths stirring the gray and the glow beneath, and other mornings when he did not sleep at all, turning like a man with fever from one side to the other. Oberyn set bowls of sand for him, because he had read a tale that said dragons like to wallow in heat without drowning. He brought sea water and fresh, and the creature turned from both with ill-contained disdain, preferring to lick moisture from Ilaria's palm. On the 14th day, Oberyn took him up into the first sun he would remember, cradled under his arm as if he were a dangerous bundle of glass. The courtyard stones had drunk the morning and wanted more. Xerix hissed at the sky from behind his teeth, as if he recognized a rival in all that blue. A horned lizard darted across the flagstones and froze a hand's breadth from death, its throat pumping. The dragon turned his head and did not give chase. Stillness did not interest him. He wanted struggling. He wanted height. Oberyn kept him on a chain of braided leather around his neck the first time they climbed the Spear Tower's dizzying final stair. Ilaria had a hand against his back the way one steadies a friend who has begun to drink too much and is about to stand. They came out into a clean wind that ran licks across Oberyn's sweat and lifted the hair at his nape. The sea spread her green quilt and showed him the stitches where waves had been mended. The desert lay on the other side, the dunes like sleeping horses. Xerix hissed at both and then at the world between. Not yet, Oberyn told him, fingers on the chain. You will not fall while I have breath, but I will not save you from your want in every case. You must learn its edges. The dragon spread his wings to the sun. The light made them into stained glass. He beat them once, twice, felt the lift, beat them again in a greedy rhythm, and Oberyn felt the pull as a lover feels the first pull of a parting. Not yet, he said again, and the creature snarled at him in a voice that promised he had been heard and would not always be obeyed. When Oberyn took him out into the dunes that afternoon, he ridden him in the way one rides a thought, careful, perched on the lip of fear and joy. The sand grabbed his ankles. The heat climbed his shins. Xerix, released from the leather chain, ran like a burrowing thing over and under the surface, sometimes no more than a shifting of grains where his body passed, sometimes lifting to leap the low ripples the wind leaves like lines in a book. He made circles and returned, as if tethered to Oberyn by a line that was real enough to read by. Do you see, my brother? Oberyn said, though Doran was not there, speaking to the dunes and to the air. Do you see, my queen? He said, though Nymeria had been dead 1,000 years and more, her legend a veil over every Dornish woman's face. Do you see, my mother? He asked, and heard her answer in the hiss of sand over stone. Xerix caught his first goat at dusk. The goatherd had been paid too much and had grumbled too loud, and Oberyn had almost ordered him sent away. But he wanted the witness of a man who did not love him. The boy who came with the herd watched with a stone's face and the quick shoulders of the poor. Xerix crouched, tail lashing, and the goat did not understand its end. When the leap came, it came with a lifted grace no man could counterfeit. The creature fell from the air toward the goat like a page turning from one chapter to the next. For a second it was a wonder. Then it was meat and blood and the sound goats make when they understand anything. The boy said nothing, but his eyes had grown big enough to hold a future. "Tell your mother what you saw," Oberyn told him, tossing him a coin he failed to catch and then knelt to pick up. "Tell her you will need more goats. Tell her I will pay her for the ones the dragon takes and for the ones it frightens to death. Tell her not to be proud. Pride has no udders." "Prince," the boy said, and the word wore him like a cloak suddenly too large. "Go," Oberyn said. The boy went. His bare feet made no sound on the sand. The first time Xerix made real fire, it was not the game he had played with spitting embers and accidentally setting Oberyn's sleeve to smoking. It came from a place deep in him, a place that did not know men. Oberyn had a hand on his back. He felt the coil gather, the way a struck snake gathers itself, the way anger collects. The exhale was not loud. It was a sigh the sun might make at noon. A rope of fire uncoiled, not long and not hot enough yet to do more than blacken the offered log. But it was fire commanded by no human tongue and obeying no human rule. Xerix shook his head afterward as if surprised by the sound of his own voice. "Good," Oberyn said, and the word came out raw. He thought of 100 men he had hated and did not intend to say their names, for fear of calling them home. "We will need more wood. You will need smarter enemies," Ilaria murmured. There was no fear on her face, only calculation. "Wood burns, but so do desires." "You see why men fall on their knees," he said, and did not bend his own. "They think the world is telling them a story, and it is only breathing." "We breathe stories here," Ilaria said, and touched the place Xerix had burned black on the log. The soot kissed her finger. She drew a line across Oberyn's cheek with it and grinned like a girl. Could not remain a secret. It would have taken a city of the deaf and a desert of the blind. Women at wells would talk as they always had talked, with their hands and their eyes, measuring each other's lives with the affection of the brutal and the brutality of the affectionate. A man in the market claimed he had seen a black lizard snake through the air and bite the sun on its heel, and another man hit him for lying, and then 2 more demanded the story for a price of figs. Rumor in Dorne grew like a cactus. Slowly at first, then all at once, with spines in every direction. Oberyn did not stop it. He hired minstrels and told them nothing and paid them to sing about old dragons that slept under the sands and woke only for women with knives in their garters. He had a tile laid in a courtyard where the sun fell every day at noon, the tile showing Nymeria standing on a ship and a dragon asleep at her feet like a dog. He played the game of truth in plain sight. Doran saw the game and did not smile. He sent letters to houses that had always needed letters, Ironwood, Fowler, Dane, letters that said nothing and everything. "Come to Sunspear. Come and see. Bring your caution. Bring your thirst." They came. Men who had long bones, women with jewelry like weapons, boys with eyes too bright and girls with wrists too strong. They came from salt and from stone. They came with their own histories trailing like cloaks. Lady Malario did not come. That wound had had its way with Doran already and would not be coaxed. Oberyn did not miss her. He missed simpler things like being a man whose hands did not smell of ash. He saw hesitation in the Ironwood Lord's eyes, the way a man looks at a new horse and wonders if its legs are good enough for what he wants from it. He saw hunger in the Fowler lady's smile, the way she noted the courtyards and counted gates. He saw in Ser Manfrey Martell's face a sour calculation that always ended in coin. He saw in the Dane child Darkstar's cousin, a boy with too much cheek and not enough chin, the easy cruelty of the beautiful. He let them look at him and at nothing. He let them stew. When at last he brought them to the courtyard, the braziers were not lit. It was noon. He had chosen noon because he did not fear the sight of his creature in full sun, and also to make the day complicit in what he was about to do. He wore a simple tunic and held no weapon and had bound his hair back with red cord. Ilaria stood at his left hand, not behind him, and the sand snakes made their own line. Obara with her spear and her scars, Nymeria with her necklaces and knives, Tyene with her sigh and her soft hands, Sarella with her book and her squint into the light. Doran sat under a canopy and drank water, and his eyes were old. "Prince Oberyn," Lord Ironwood said, very polite, very cold. You called us to an entertainment, or so your letter implied with all its lack of meaning. I called you to a lesson, Oberyn said, and to a choice. Lessons cost, the Fowler lady said. She wore a falcon carved from silver at her throat, and it glinted like an idea. Choices cost more. Then you have brought your purses, Oberyn said, and the laughter that ran along the line of men and women was not sufficient to be called a wave. It is well. We shall count together. He whistled, not sharply, not as one calls dogs, but in a pattern only Xerix had been made to learn, and the dragon came from the shade of a palm where he had been watching children splash at a pool as if they were fish. He came walking, not flying, because Oberyn had taught him to prefer the insult of walking among men. The sand had patterns of old bronze light across it, and Xerix's shadow cut a straight line through those ripples. He was no longer small enough to curl in a hand. He had length now and the beginnings of mass, a body that promised to become when fed and encouraged. His scales had darkened, the red deepening into a garnet that held light like wine holds lamplight. His eyes had turned the color of hot iron quenched in oil. He carried himself with the caution of a cat and the laziness of a creature that can scald the world if it likes. When he lifted his head, several men made a mistake with their feet and took a step back they later pretended had been only a shifting of weight. Oberyn put his hand on the dragon's neck, just behind the hinge of the jaw, where the heat is greatest, where command looks like a caress. Xerix flicked his tongue out and took in the scents. Sweat, leather, politics. He tasted them all and disliked none. Lords of salt, lords of stone, Oberyn said. So the words would fall into the pool and make small rings that would spread into larger ones whether anyone wished it or not. And all who stand under the colors of those who govern our days, I have asked you here because stories have long gathered around your ears like flies. I grow weary of swatting at them. He turned his head. Brother, do you tire of my voice? I tire of everything, Doran said mildly, and several laughed the laugh of men who did not know which jokes were safe. Oberyn smiled without teeth. When Nymeria came to these sands, he said, she burned her ships to make her promise visible, so even the most stubborn idiots of that day could understand. I am done speaking in gritted whispers. I have brought into my house a creature that will not go away because one does not wish to see it. There are men in the north who think dragons can be counted only by their own archivists. There are men who think Dorne's greatest treasure is its obedience. He let his hand travel along Xerix's jaw. The dragon closed his eyes. He could feel the low purr in the bone. Look and learn. He did not say any command word. He did not need to. He leaned his own heat toward the dragon with his breath, as a man in a crowded room might lean his intention toward a woman he had already introduced himself to. Xerix took the cue and opened his mouth. A heat rope unspooled, caught the offering he had placed in the yard. A bullock already cut at the throat and kissed it to fire. The flesh shuddered and blackened in one breath. It was not a grand display, not a sky-splitting flame that made men who pretend to gods kneel. It was a precise and ugly piece of work. That was what Oberyn wanted. He watched their faces as they watched his creature reduce meat to a lesson. No one moved. By the seven, someone said softly, and the whisper of that old faith slithered across the tiles and went still. By the river gods who drowned our grandmothers, Ilaria murmured, too, a countercharm. Dragons are dead, said the Ironwood Lord, and then, because he could not deny his eyes, he amended it. Dragons were dead. Kings were dead, Oberyn said. They breed like locusts. You had best grow used to the noise they make chewing. He turned his back, with calculated discourtesy, on the men who had for years counted themselves his equals, and addressed those who had never considered themselves such, the children. They were clustered at the pool with its green bed and small silver fish, and their faces were the unarmored faces only the very young can have. He crouched until his knees cracked and put his hand in the water and watched the waves form around his fingers. Do you know what this means? He asked a boy who had lost his front teeth and a girl whose hair was as dark as night. It means no man from Highgarden or King's Landing should ever tell you, again, how you must wear your fear. It means when you go to bed tonight, you can imagine a world larger than the one your mother has told you to fit inside. He did not say it means people will come to kill you and your mothers. He did not say you will not sleep again as you did last night. When he stood and faced the lords again, he had tied his hair back in another red cord, a gesture precise as a promise. "Hear me," he said, and if he had had a drum, he would have struck it once. He had no drum. He had his chest. What is a prince? But a man who has not yet dared to name himself. I am done with that. I am not a man of maybes, though I have spent my life among men who make the future out of nothing but conditional moods. He stepped up onto the low stair that led to Doran's chair. He did not go further. He put himself halfway between obedience and insolence, because the middle of a blade is the only honest place to stand. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. "I am not your prince," he said. "I am your king." A ripple went through the crowd as if a stone had been cast into it. Not surprise. Dorn had always told this story to itself and had been waiting to hear it said out loud by a man who did not tremble to speak. "Of what?" asked the Fowler lady, because she was brave. Her voice had the crispness of sliced apples. "Of fire and sand," Oberyn said. He rolled the words in his mouth to see if they would break his teeth. They did not. He smiled and did not hide his teeth. "I will not hide behind old names and call that fidelity. I am the king of what I can make and of what I can defend. I will burn what seeks to chain us, and I will praise what seeks to grow. I will tear open letters and show their thin lies to the sun. I will carry into this courtyard men who have made children scream and rip their names from their tongues." He felt Illyria's hand on his elbow, a reminder, not a restraint. "And show them to you. I will not command the sea to be calm. I will ask of it what it will give. I will ask the desert to be kind, and it will laugh, and I will love it anyway." Doran lifted a hand. It trembled. He looked at it as if it were no longer part of him. "Little brother," he said, so quietly only those nearest heard, which was sufficient, for words can travel without being heard. "This is reckless." "Yes," Oberyn said tenderly. "I was always your lion in a goat pen. Let me be what I am. If I do not forbid you, if I cannot, then I must do something else." "You must watch," Oberyn said, "and decide how you will stand with me. Families destroy themselves over less. Provinces burn. Provinces burn whether families agree or not," Oberyn said. "Dorn has already burned. It has burned slow and polite, like charcoal, for a generation. We have called it civility. It has warmed other men's hands." Tyene stepped forward and lifted her white palms. "I will swear," she said. "I will swear to you if you swear to more than yourself." "I swear to the children at the water gardens," Oberyn said immediately, without thought, because the truth does not always need thinking. "I swear that every decision I make will end with me standing under those trees looking at those faces and asking if the cost is a price they can pay. If the answer is no, I will undo what I have done." "Words," Lord Ironwood said, because it was his habit to distrust anything that did not jingle. "Words and a lizard. Words made you," Oberyn said, "and the lizard will unmake you if you stand on the wrong side of them." One by one, because there is always a first, the people in that courtyard made their calculations. The Fowler lady did not kneel. She inclined her head to exactly the degree that expresses interest without commitment. Lord Ironwood looked up at the sun and found it indifferent, and he set his jaw, for he had wanted a softer day to be a coward in. Ser Manfrey counted and found that the sum still came to risk, and smiled with a sourbread's joy in refusing joy. A boy and a girl near the pool made their own vow with the solemnity of the young, and their vow was only to remember the shape of the dragon's wings when they were older and the world had grown smaller. Nymeria s. and knelt because she loved theater and made her pledge with a knife's flat laid over her heart. Obara knelt because she loved her father and did not mock him for once with a joke. Tyene knelt because she loved vows and sometimes loved keeping them. Sarella did not kneel. She wrote in her book a sentence that meant kneeling and would keep it for when it might be useful. Illyria stood and did not move, and her stillness was loud. She pressed her fingers into his elbow until he looked at her. "I will not kneel," she said, and the murmur fled the courtyard as if burned. "I will not call you king because you are my lover and because the word is a stone that breaks open women's heads. But I will stand with you because I understand what you mean. I will stand with you because I know the weight of your hand on a child's spine is never cruel. I will stand with you because I have loved you at your worst, and this is better. I will stand with you because you asked me with your eyes and not with your mouth." "Good," Oberyn said. "Do not kneel. Stand. Standing has always suited you." He turned then and faced the lords who had not moved and those who had and those who could not decide if their knees still worked. "Send your ravens," he said, as if he were speaking of the ordering of wine. "Tell King's Landing what you have seen if it pleases you to invite their envy. Tell Highgarden to count its stores. Tell Old Town to read its books again." He laid his palm on Xerxes' neck, felt the heat answer him. "I am the king of fire and sand. Take me at my word." Ariohoda coughed once, a dry sound that made men start as if it had been a whip. "They will come," he said, "whoever they are. The ones who cannot let this stand because it makes their own houses look like tents." "I know," Oberyn said. He thought of the roads to come and of the men who would try them with banners and reasons. He had always known that if he lived long enough he would find a fight that fit his size in the world. "I am not afraid." "You should be," Doran said. "Of course." He turned his face toward the sea, and in that moment he allowed himself to imagine the old fantasy men have had since there were cliffs. He imagined riding the heat like a gull rides the wind. He did not need to. It would happen or it would not. Fear is a good advisor. It tells you where the edges are sharp. It is not a good king. He left the courtyard then, because to stand and drink in the moment is to let it begin to rot, and he had learned the cost of feasting too long on one victory. He went to the rooms where the brazier coals had cooled. He went to the place where he had first lain his hand upon stone and called himself a hope. Xerxes came behind him with a swagger that would make men dead. Ilaria walked at his side with silence that would save children living. The sand snakes followed like sinful thoughts. In the private heat of his secret room, Oberyn sat with his back to the wall and let his blood come down like a tide. He had done it. He had said the words men could not unsay. He felt like a bow that has let loose a long-held arrow. His hands would shake later. His sleep would be broken. He could now hear in his bones the sound of hooves on roads that led south. The future had the taste of iron on his tongue. "You have put a torch to a very large house," Ilaria said. "Good," he said. The house needed new light. She leaned her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. "There will be smoke first. There always is. We should send for goats," she said. "And for letters. I will need letters to mothers, and to men who think they understand mothers. I will send ravens," he said. "Ravens should learn to love me. I am tired of them loving other men." He let his hand fall to the heat along Xerxes' spine. The dragon shivered under his touch and made the small sound he had come to crave in the middle hours of the night, when he woke from old hatreds and needed a new purpose to cling to. "I will take you to the desert tomorrow," he told the creature. "You will learn to hunt the wind without falling. The wind is our enemy and our tutor both." The dragon showed his teeth, not in a smile, but in a bearing that meant I exist and you exist and we will have our reckoning together. In the days that followed, Sunspear changed its posture and pretended it had not. Men who had not before thought much about the sun's position began to measure noon with their eyes. Women who had been content to whisper behind hands let their voices carry a little further. Children who had been born in quiet discovered that shouting did no harm. The spear tower's stones did not move, but they felt like traveling companions. You walk with a dragon, and even the walls stepped differently. Carts came and went with covered loads, and in those loads were dried meat for a creature that scorned refuse, and bundles of fresh-killed goats, and sacks of coal and jars of oil, and a metalworker's new-cast chain links that might one day become anklets or whips or ornaments, depending on how one held them. Letters went out with crisp seals, and letters came back with smudged ones, and in the texts were men's best attempts to wrestle words into sense. Tyene sorted them with a patience that bordered on a vice. Sarella read to him the bits that mattered. her voice flat and full of a scholar's contempt. "You will be challenged," she said without looking up from a folded parchment, "by a book of old laws and a man with a spooked horse. Which will you prefer?" "I prefer the horse," he said. "It is honest." He rubbed at the back of his knuckles and found the cuts there had scabbed into a map. "I suppose both will arrive at once." Nymeria taught Xerix to come to the rasp of her bracelets, making a pattern with her bangles that looked like dancing and was only function. Obara built a post and made it taller and stood under it with her spear at the ready, daring the creature to fly when he thought himself sufficient. Taine put out small dishes of water and counted how many times he would disdain them before he grudgingly lowered his muzzle and drank. She could predict everything that could be predicted and smiled when he spoiled her sums. Ilaria learned his moods as a nurse learns an infant's. The way his nostrils flared when he was about to spit, the way his tail described a wider arc when he wanted to test someone's limits, the way his eyelids lowered when he was almost calm. Ariohoda washed his spear, even when it did not need washing, and watched the doors and watched the corners and watched Oberyn when he thought the man was not aware he was being watched. He was aware. It was part of his pleasure to feel the Norvashi's attention on his back like a careful friend's hand. Doran sat with a map in his lap, an old map with frayed corners and rivers that had been drawn by men who thought they knew what water would do. He traced the road from King's Landing to the Boneway with a finger so slowly, he might as well have been writing a prayer. He did not call for Oberyn. He did not talk to the dragon. He did what prudent men do. He prepared for a life he could not desire. When his son came to him quietly and asked if dragons were good or bad, Doran gave the only answer a man like him could give and remain a man like him. He said, "They are." The declaration traveled quickly. King's words grow legs. In King's Landing, a man smiled whose smiles never reached his eyes and said, "At last, someone will take my attention from my own boredom." In Old Town, an archmaester called for a candle that burned green and said the word hazard twice before pinching the flame out with his fingers to see if it would bite him. In High Garden, a woman who loved gardens more than kings stepped into the heat of her glasshouse and read a letter twice, once as a threat and once as a piece in a game she had already decided how to play. Oberyn slept when he could, under a sheet that smelled of ash. He dreamed of dunes that moved like armies and of sky that cracked like a dry lip and of men whose faces he knew becoming other men's faces when he turned to look again. He woke when the dragon hissed and went out to the courtyard and watched dawn do its slow, familiar trick of becoming day. He felt the thing he had refused most of his life to feel without mockery. He felt responsibility sit on his shoulders and not crush him. He felt the possibility of failure, which he had never spared a thought for, present itself like a lover who has waited patiently and now asks to be taken seriously. He put his hands on the railing and looked down at the children already splashing in the pool and let the world do what it does without asking him for orders. It would ask soon enough. On the 6th morning after the declaration, a raven arrived with a livery not Oberyn did not recognize at first. The brown-inked handwriting smelled of prudence and flowers. He broke the seal with his thumbnail and read a challenge couched in courtesy and a warning wrapped in politeness and a request dressed as a kindness. He held the parchment up so Ilaria could read over his shoulder. Her breath stirred a curl at his temple. "A supper," she said. "How civilized. Will you wear your best knife?" "I will bring my best fire," he said and smiled, but not with the old smile that made women soften and men set their chins. He smiled with the thing inside him that had found a perfect fit in this heat. "Let them learn to dine with dragons. Do not feed the guests to him," Ilaria said reasonably and kissed his jaw. "Not yet. Not yet," he agreed. Xerix lifted his head at the sound of their voices, and in his eyes there was no love the way men mean love. There was only regard, the regard a desert keeps for a man who has found water and not been foolish with it. It was enough. It would have to be. Oberyn went down into the city, down among the people who had given him his first bruises and his first admirations, down where the women made the bread and the men made the knives and sometimes the other way around. He tasted dates from a vendor's hand and paid twice what she asked. Not because he wished to buy love, but because he wished to make generosity a habit that would embarrass him into a better man when he forgot. He let boys run their fingers along his sleeve and gaped when one of them dared touch the dragon's scaled side and did not lose his hand. He listened. "King," said a man with a cart whose wheel had a wobble. The word sat like a stone in his mouth. "But it's Saturday, King," said a woman whose hair was braided with copper wire. It gleamed. She did not. "King," said a girl with a scar on her cheek that would be called beauty and never would be to her. And she spat after the word as if to throw bad spirits off the scent and grinned at him because she knew what she had done. He did not correct the ones who could not let the word out. He did not punish the ones who did. He fed the dragon slices of goat from the knife he'd had since he was a boy and did not mind when the creature's teeth nicked the edge. He paid for the meat. He learned the names of men he would be asked to bury and the names of women who would carry his children if he asked them and the names of boys who would follow him and die and of girls who would remember and live and tell it a different way. He came back to the spear tower with a ribbon tied around his wrist by an old woman who had no teeth and cursed him with a curse that was all blessing and with a bowl of figs stolen from a man too slow to stop her and with a story from a tanner about a dream in which the sea rose and then receded and left in the sand a single scale the size of a hand. And he made for his secret room and sat down as if he had been traveling a long way. "Now," he said. "Now," Ilaria echoed. "Now," Zarek said in his own way, and a small puff of smoke curled from his nostril. Alas, as if at last his humor pleased him. Oberyn Martell, not prince and now king by his own tongue's courage, rested his palm on heat and felt it answer him. The city arranged itself around them as a woman arranges her hair. Carefully, quickly, with an eye for both beauty and the demands of the day. The ravens would fly. The men with maps would put their fingers down on roads. The women with knives would sharpen them and set them under pillows as they always had. The children would learn a new game and play it without the shame their grandmothers had been taught to bend into their spines. He stood because there was no way to live this day sitting down, and because the wind had shifted. It blew in from the west, where men mistook green for truth, and it carried the smell of rain that never came. Xerxes lifted his head, tasting it as if it were a message. It was. He would learn to read it. They all would. He smiled into it and said the word he had been making for years without knowing. The word that was not a spell but a promise made to himself, to Ilaria, to the dragon, to his brother, and to the people who had never asked to be carried by any man. "Come," he said, and the day came, obedient as a well-trained beast, wild as a wind over dunes, unpromised to anyone and his all the same. The morning began in a light the color of thin apricot flesh, the kind that must be eaten over a bowl lest the sweetness run down wrist and elbow and drip to waist. The eastern sky took its time learning to be blue. The air held its breath. Oberyn walked out through the long-ago broken arch onto the practiced sand with his sandals hanging from his fingers, because he liked to feel the small knife points of grit press their honest pattern against his soles. Xerxes came behind him with the heavy grace of a creature that has just discovered it has joints. Pausing twice to flick his tongue at beetles, he did not trouble himself to eat. Ariohoda watched from the shadow cut by the low wall and did not announce himself, as a man does not applaud the sunrise for showing up. "Not north," Oberyn said to the dragon in that same soft high Valyrian he fell into when he needed to borrow certainty from his own mouth. "The wind comes sly from that quarter this morning, south and east. Feel it. Let it have your face." He extended his arm, the one most scarred, and the dragon stepped up from the sand to his wrist and then higher, claws pricking, tail lashing with the small spite that was not anger, merely an acknowledgement of the world's resistance. Oberyn braced and felt the strength in that light body, that promise of force coiled inside cartilage and bone. He lifted. The wings opened in a smudged fan, the membranes an old wine shade, veined and fine as the skin between a baby's fingers when it first reaches for the world. A breath, too, then a beat, testing. The wind ran along Xerxes' edges and hummed, pleased with itself. "Now," Oberyn murmured, more to the morning than the beast, and released. For a stretch of heartbeats, the dragon did not fall and did not fly. He existed in the uncertain argument between gravity and arrogance, wings scooping at air he had not yet learned to persuade. Then something in him found a better angle, and he trapped a pocket of morning as one traps a moth in cupped hands. He glided what could not honestly be called a distance but which felt to Oberyn like an era, then landed in a low scuff and a sharp shake of head, as if disgusted with the ground for being so immediate. Ario's mouth lifted by the thickness of a thumbnail. He rolled the haft of his spear from palm to palm. "He will learn," he said. "So did I," Oberyn said, and meant nothing as small as walking. They repeated the game until the sun had grown serious and the stone of the walls held heat in their brows. The fourth glide was longer than the first. The seventh ended with a tumble and a furious spitting of smoke at the treacherous sand. The 10th was almost graceful, a long curve along a blade of wind that had just decided to be generous. When fatigue arrived, it did so with no preliminaries, as it always did in a creature that had not yet been alive enough to understand the body's small treasons. Zarek suddenly was done with effort. He sprawled with chin in the dust and eyes narrowed to the slits of a creature who swallows contempt for a world that does not yet bend. Oberyn crouched beside him and stroked the knob between the jaw hinges and the first plate of throat, the place where heat collects. The dragon relaxed with insulting immediacy and went boneless under his palm, as if he had been waiting for permission to admit tiredness. "You will not always have me," Oberyn told him without bitterness. "Learn to ask the air instead. It owes you nothing. That is its virtue." He left the animal to his sulk and walked back across the sand where Ilaria had set a small table under a linen shade. She had already taught the shade not to flap by weighting its edges with river stones polished to a shine by boys' feet. She had a bowl of grapes which she was not eating, a plate of cheeses she had allowed to smell themselves awake, and a jug that sweated. She did not look up when he approached, because she had seen him the entire time and had decided ahead of time when to look. "You have a smile you are not showing me," she said, picking a grape as if it were a jewel in need of testing. "You should show it. Men think it makes them powerful to hide pleasure, as if delight were a secret weapon. It is not. It is just proof that you are not a nail being hammered." "I have never concealed that," Oberyn said, and sat with a sigh that let the morning out of his bones. "What I conceal out of kindness. If I wrote down the names of my enemies in the margins of my prayers, the paper would catch fire." "You do not pray," Ilaria said mildly. "I am learning," he said. He poured water over the back of his hand and watched it run like quicksilver and fall to be stolen by the sand. Xerix, who might have been asleep, opened one eye and watched the pool and decided to scorn it. "Who has written to sneer at me today? 3 men who think their houses are boats and that boats are safer than sand," Ilaria said. "A woman who wants you to bless her pig with a touch because she has decided it is the sort of thing a king does to make pigs fecund. A boy with an uneven hand who has used all his courage to ask if he might come up the spear tower to look at the dragon and decide whether he is afraid. And a letter that smells of flowers and calculation." She tapped a paper with 2 fingers and slid it across. "From the woman who grows roses and men with equal success." Oberyn took the Tyrell script between fingers still edged with sand and read the fine, friendly insolence of it. There was no title addressed to him, which was as informative as if there had been one. There were no threats, which in itself threatened. There was an invitation couched as hospitality and a promise of wine that would bleed pleasure from the tongue. There was a supper proposed at a time and place that offered safety without admitting fear. "She invites me to dine at Planky Town," he said. "She invites you to let her count your teeth," Ilaria said. "She promises to show you some of hers." "She will not come herself," Oberyn said, feeling fondness for the game as a swordsman feels fondness for a familiar opponent's stance. "She will send a face she wishes me to look at and a mouth that is trained to make me hear what she intends. If she is mean, she sends a dullard. If she is clever, she sends a man I might like. Then prepare to like someone," Ilaria said. She selected a piece of cheese and bit it with care, as if the cheese had a chance to defend itself at the last moment. "And prepare to not believe them." He folded the letter and placed it under the jug as if to keep it from flying away. "We will host them here," he said. "Let them count their steps through our hallways. Let them admire the children at the water gardens and pretend it moves them. Let them count gates and men and spoons. I am tired of women guessing at us from behind their greenhouses. Let them breathe our dust. Doran will prefer the water gardens, Ilaria said. He will say it is an emblem. He will say that men behave better around water and children. They behave more carefully, Oberyn said. Those two things are cousins but not kin. He looked to where the dragon lay, now with both eyes closed and one foot twitching, perhaps killing something in a dream. He hates to fail. I will set him up to fail until he decides he wants to fly more than he wants to sulk. That method has worked on every man you have taught to be good at anything, Ilaria said. Except yourself. I learned to be good at you, he said, and she offered him a grape with a roll of her eyes and a softness around the mouth that she let him see only because no one else was near enough to mistake it for weakness. Aereo moved from shadow to sun as a cloud moves when it remembers its errand. He was a careful shape against the bright. There is a woman below, he said, with a goat that is more scar than goat. She has brought it like an accusation. She has brought a boy who will not look at the goat because he fed it and thinks that makes him to blame. She is not shouting. Send her up, Oberyn said. The ones who do not shout are the ones who have saved a scream for when it will do some good. The woman the stairs produced had a headscarf of old blue turned gray by days, hands chapped and cracked into maps of her work, a mouth that had once been impatient and had learned patience late and badly, so it looked like a wound instead of a virtue. The goat was not mostly goat. The fire had kissed one side and taken an ear and the hair on that flank and the first layer of skin, leaving a patchwork where it had once been plain. The boy was the string that tied the two living things together. He kept his eyes on his toes as if they might run away if he did not supervise them. Ilaria stood. She shook out the linen as if to welcome a guest of rank, because rank is a game and hospitality is not. She set a cup on the table where the woman could see it and another for the boy. Sit, she said. Speak when you choose. The woman did not sit. I am Yera, daughter of Tolan, and this is my son Martell, who is stubborn and good when it is useless. Your lizard burned my goat. It was hungry, and I understand hunger. I do not want to understand it from princes. If your beast eats my herd, I will spend my days feeding your mouths for a gold I will never be allowed to hold. If that is the plan, tell me, and I will go to my sister by the Greenblood and pretend I like boats. I will sell oranges to men who have lost their homes to the river, and I will not ask them to pay me for my loss. Her voice was as flat as the dirt outside a poor man's door. Oberyn looked at the goat the way he looked at wounds on men, without flinching, with a craftsman's interest in damage. He looked at the boy. He saw the raw edges in both. I am sorry, he said, and the words did not cost him because they were true. I will pay you for the goat and more than the goat. I will say how much and you will tell me I am being stupid, and I will ignore you. I will also say that if I cannot teach my beast to come when I call and leave what is mine to me, then I am only a man who has set fire to the slope where his own house stands. I am not such a man. Yera's mouth did not soften. What is a king who cannot keep promises to women with goats? A liar, Oberyn said. I do not intend to be that either. He looked at Ilaria. She had already drawn a little writing tablet from nowhere and a reed pen that was always waiting. She wrote and did not ask him how much. She knew how much. That is for the animal and a season's milk, yes. Aid when she handed him the tablet to sign. Tyene will also come to your yard and teach your boy how to hold the rope. He will learn commands. He will learn the signs we make. He will not approach my beast unless I say so. He will not bring meat without asking. If he does any of those things, you will come spit at my door and tell me I am careless. I will not like it, but I will be grateful. The woman did sit then, not because she had been told to but because the moment had turned. Her shoulders relaxed by the thickness of one breath. You are a talker, she said to him. Talkers do not always turn out to be men. Neither do fighters, Ilaria said gently. We do not give you our word lightly. Keep coming until you are convinced. The boy watched the dragon with the wary curiosity of someone who has once reached for a flame and learned it does not love fingers. Does it have a name? He asked. as if a name could be used to call the creature back into the skin of a story if the world broke loose. "It does," Oberyn said, "but you will not use it unless we say you may. Names are leashes and ropes and ribbons and knives, depending on who holds them." The boy nodded as if that sentence were what his day had been waiting to hear. He looked once at the goat, which was working its jaw with a stubborn dignity that made Oberyn want to weep. He did not. He had learned to give tears to women and children and his own heart and to keep the world on the dry side of his eyes. When they had gone, Areo stood not quite out of earshot until a beat after it would have been polite to pretend he had never been there. "There will be 100 Yaras," he said. "There will be 1,000 Martell boys. They will not all come with goats. Some will come with sons." "I know," Oberyn said. He looked down at his hand. The callus at the base of his thumb had cracked again. A thin rim of red showed. He flexed and it burned. "I will not make a coward of myself and call that prudence. I will not be a fool and call that courage." Areo turned his spear, letting the light run along the oiled shaft. "If I must put my spear through its eye, tell me to do it and do not wait until your mouth is full of smoke to decide. I would prefer not to die and not to kill this thing. Preference is not a plan." "No," Oberyn said. "Preference is where the plan begins." He looked back at Xerix, who had now arranged himself to catch as much sun as his hide could swallow. "He will learn. We will teach him to learn. He is not a comet. He is not a god. He is an animal that believes it is entitled to the world because the world made him like this. We will show him the edges of his entitlement." "Sarella will like that phrase," Ilaria said. She has already drawn a picture of the dragon's head on 2 pages, measuring the distance between nostrils with string. She thinks the right string will save us. Sarella did more than draw. She arrived an hour later with a small black pot slung from a cord and a brush of stiff hairs that shed like a cat. Her eye was hazed with the look of someone who has forgotten to blink long enough that the world has become unpleasantly too bright. "Hold him," she said to Oberyn with an authority that came naturally to anyone used to making the world sit still until it is properly looked at. "I am going to make marks. If he bites me, I will bite him back and learn nothing." "What are you dobing him with?" Oberyn asked, feeling a sudden flick of useless protectiveness that made him want to hide the creature behind him as if it were a child who had been careless with a toy. He offered the dragon his forearm. Xerix stepped up and accepted handling with the sleeking arrogance of a tomcat who has decided the lap belongs to him. "Coal with ash," Sarella said. "Not poisonous. He will look handsome. It will wash away with water or wear off with the day. I will set marks at the edges of his jaw, here and here, and one at the joint of each wing, and one on the belly just behind the keel. Then I will measure again in a week. We will have numbers that are not guesses. You can make a strategy from numbers. Guesses are only invitations to pride." She worked with the precise indifference of a midwife who had delivered 200 babies and is never overawed by the appearance of a 201st. Xerix endured and then, as if deciding he had given his quota of cooperation to the afternoon, snapped at her sleeve and tore a neat notch from the cloth. She looked at the tear as if it were data. "Noted," she said, and moved the brush out of range of his next experiment. "You will give me lists of the wood you want," Oberyn said. "You will give me lists of meat and charcoals and sand. You will give me lists for the smith and the leather worker. I will give you more than you ask for, and you will accuse me of waste, and we will both be right. I will give you also a list of fish," Sarella said, frowning at the net she had made at the base of the tail. "There is a story that says a dragon once took fish from a net after it had eaten a horse, and then did not fly for 2 days because it did not like the taste of its own breath. I want to see if our beast is fussy." "You could have asked a courtier to teach you that," Ilaria said dryly. "But the dragon is prettier." By noon, the practice yard was too honest. Heat told even men who have spent their lives in it to tread lightly. The children in the water gardens had grown loud. Their voices traveled in thin silver strands through the colonnade and made a net in which Oberyn allowed his thoughts to rest. It would be a supper, then. He could see it already. Green silk against pale stone, roses laid where he would have laid salt. He did not want to give them roses. He wanted to give them the smell of the seaweed that drifts to shore and dries and makes itself useful in beds. But he understood theater. He stretched and heard his vertebrae clack one after the other like a string of small shells. He went to Doran's solar because it pleased him to stand in the room where his brother taught furniture how to hold patience. Doran had a map on his lap. This one was a newer copy. The ink still dark. The sea that old pale green that suggests comfort to men who do not live by it. His hand rested over a blank patch in the deep deserts as if the blankness comforted him. No one had drawn a road there, so no one could march. He lifted his gaze when Oberyn entered, and for a thin measure of time they were boys with scraped knees again. One too cautious to jump from the wall into the irrigation ditch, one too proud to climb down the ladder. Past. "You have invited our enemies to dinner," Doran said. "Shall I set the table at the water gardens and call for figs? You shall sit where you may watch me and interrupt me if I am about to be a fool," Oberyn said. "You shall send for figs and for the woman who bakes flatbread with holes in it that make feather shadows on the tongue. She will charge double if she knows she is feeding men who plan plots," Doran said. He set the map aside with the delicacy of a man setting down his own heart. "I will place the supper in the water gardens and not the spear tower. This is not stubbornness. This is craft. If we feed them in a place that smells of lime and wet stone and children, they will be forced to behave as if they are capable of gentleness. If we feed them under a ceiling of spears, they will bring their hard faces and their folded arms, and it will be more tedious." Oberyn sat and put his heels out and his overconfident knees apart and let his brother look at him. "We will not hide the dragon," he said. "We cannot," Doran said. "Hiding is a thing one does well or not at all. You have never liked the well part." "We will not parade him," Oberyn said. "We will let him be himself. If he wants to sleep through the supper, let him. If he wants to warm a bowl of sauce because he can tell it is too cool, let him." Doran's mouth did something that might, on a day when he was less tired and less convinced that his life had been a long, thus far successful attempt to keep his house from falling apart, have been called a smile. "You think he can tell a sauce temperature? He knows my voice when I am about to say something stupid," Oberyn said. "Why should sauce be harder?" Doran lifted his hands and then set them down again. "Do not make me hope," he said, which was as close to a blessing as his nature could offer without breaking itself. Tyene found them then, as she had a way of doing when the conversation had reached a flavor she liked. She was bare-armed, a thread of blue tied at her wrist, a smile like a secret. "I have drafted sentences," she said. "Words you will use instead of your own when a certain sort of man tries to make you angry. I have also drafted sentences for the woman in green who will decide whether she will one day be your enemy or your mother-in-law. If you say them as written, they will calm you. If you say your own, they may not." "I do not plan to marry a rose," Oberyn said idly. "You do not plan many things that happen," Tyene said, handing him a small sheaf of neat script. "The opposite is also true. I have also sent a kettle of broth to Yara the goatherd. It is well spiced. It will make her feel the world is sometimes interested in making a place for her." "Are you angry that I did something without asking?" "If I were, I would pretend I was not," Oberyn said. "Keep doing it. Ask me when it would embarrass me not to know." Tyene touched Doran's shoulder with a quick, almost a child's impulsive tenderness, the sort of touch a boy would make to reassure himself the father he adored had not moved while he had been gone to fetch a stick. Doran did not startle. He closed his eyes for the space of one breath, opened them again, and gave her the smallest nod in the world, which she saw and tucked away as if it were gold. The day settled into its heat and then softened at the edges, as if it had smoothed its skirts for supper. Sorella's coal dots left faint smears on Xerx's jaw as he, at last wholly awake again, tried to drag a dead palm frond into the shade with the single-minded idiocy of a prince who must be allowed to complete a task that matters to no one but him. Obara had set up a post in the courtyard, as tall as the second-story window, and she made a game of tossing rings of rope at its tip, catching them back on her spear with a twist that made children gasp. Nymeria let a length of chain run through her fingers, making it sing, and taught the dragon to follow its sound as if it were prey. Arya walked with men who would one day be asked to set themselves between their city and disaster. He taught them to breathe while they were frightened, which is a skill and not a gift. At late afternoon, a procession of women arrived without sending a boy ahead. They wore their hair bound in simple cloth and carried baskets on their hips, and each basket held something that could be made into food with water and patience. They came like a tide, and Oberyn, who had stood against different tides and learned to respect this one more than most, went to meet them with his hands empty and his mouth shut. They did not speak at once. They set down their baskets and arranged themselves as women arrange themselves when they mean to talk about what matters. The older ones slightly in front because they will speak, and the younger ones in a loose half-circle because they will be told when to speak or not. Ilaria, who knew the formation from the inside, took her place among them and not at Oberyn's side. Tyene stayed at the edge, hands folded, righteous and dangerous. Sarella leaned against a column and made notes in her head because the world was always producing material. "We have come to look at the dragon," said the oldest woman, whose mouth had no teeth and whose eyes had all the ones anyone had dropped in a century. "Look," Oberyn said and stepped back, and it pleased him that the dragon did not look up immediately, did not present himself. He was busy worrying a charred log, mouth working, smoke curling faintly each time he exhaled. A creature could not keep its theater always ready. It had to be allowed to be ridiculous. "He is not a god," the old woman said, satisfied. "They have said he is. They say many things because men think words are a net you can throw over a thing to make it stop being what it is. He is a lizard that eats fire. He has a cleverness in him, though. Look how he counts his distance before he jumps. Look at his tail. He will have a temper." "I can confirm 2 of those 3 statements," Ilaria said. "We have come to tell you what we will do," another woman said, one with sleeves rolled to elbows, flower on the hair at her temple, an apron that had known better days and not regretted either the better or the worse. "We will not let our children run in the yard where he is let to play. We will bring them to look, one by one or in twos, with a hand on the nape and our right to slap if the little fools are overcome by the part of the heart that says, 'Touch the pretty thing. It will not hurt you because it is yours.'" "Good," Oberyn said. "We will mark times when he is not here. We will give them to you." "And," said a younger woman whose hair was still wet from an earlier washing at the cistern, who had lines of water on her throat that caught light like jewelry, "we will learn your signals, so when you make the clicking with your teeth he will think it is from your mouth and not from ours. We will cheat him." "He will not like that," Nymeria said with a delighted malice. "Let him find a way to like it. Better women than he have had to." The women nodded, baskets reclaimed, business complete. A few lingered, not too close, and watched Xerix take his time with that foolish log. One child, tugging on a string at his mother's waist and failing to untie it, stared and laughed at something only he could see. The way the dragon's tongue appeared and went inside again too fast to admire. Oberyn felt the shape of the day settle around that laugh and held still to not disturb it. At dusk, Tyene went to the water gardens with a bowl of ash and a bowl of river mud. She mixed them until they were the color of evening and made lines on children's cheeks with a serious look and explained that these were scales for those who had none. The children held their breath as one holds a thing that is about to become precious. When she was done, they raced along the long pool, howling softly, and their soft howling echoed up into stone where it sounded like prayer and like a warning to men who do not listen, both at once. The supper was not that day, nor the next. Ravens have wings, but men drag luggage. In the first night, the dragon woke 3 times as if his sleep itself had been trying to learn to be a dragon and had failed. Each time Oberyn sat cross-legged and placed his hand on the warm place between jaw and throat, and each time the creature settled as if disappointment had been kept at bay by the pressure of a palm. Ilaria slept with her arm flung into the gap he left each time he sat up, and in the morning she said nothing about the ache. If she had called it an ache, it would have been an argument her body would have won. In King's Landing or Old Town or some other city that memorized itself nightly, someone's ink dried in a sentence that named Oberyn a rebel and a fool and a story, and most of those words were meant as insults. Messages traveled as they always had, in mouths, in bags, in sleeves, in songs. A man came to Sunspear with a badly folded paper and an offer to buy the dragon with rubies, with an offer to buy Oberyn with a marriage, with a threat to buy Doran with the old coin of fear. Oberyn read, drank, laughed, set the paper on the ledge where the sea could reach it if it wished to learn to read, and fed the dragon slivers of goat as if the animal were a chronicle that needed punctuation. Hoda met with the captains who slept with their boots on and said the things men like him say when they are asked for safety. Count your breath. Make peace with the sun. Learn to aim at men who will one day be your neighbors if they live. He did not make them promises no man could keep. Promises are delicate. They break under armor. He held the spear in his hands with such long intimacy that the wood had learned the instructions of his skin. He had a dream once that he would die and his spear would not, and would stand in a corner of a room in which children were playing and hear their games and ache with a yearning it could not name. He woke and did not tell the dream to anyone. He made other arrangements with the day. The green and gold sails showed on the third afternoon as a rumor in the far line of the sea, as if a girl had put a ribbon on the horizon and then grown shy and wished to retrieve it. Sunspear, which had learned to act unimpressed at 100 unnecessary displays, kept its doings in their rhythms. The ovens did not slow. The fishwives did not put down their knives. But men went to walls and women went to the water gardens and pretended to fuss with ribbons in girls' hair so they could look up without being obvious. The young squire with a scrape on his chin from practicing falling found reasons to carry 3 buckets in a place where 2 would have done. Oberyn stood on the low parapet where the plaster had worn away in one corner to show the honest stone beneath and watched the galleys come in. He could already feel the shape of the conversation they would bring, the way one feels the shape of a fruit under skin before one peels it. There would be an apology for presumption. There would be a small insult hidden inside the apology like a worm in a fig. There would be laughter. There would be politeness that wished to be cruelty. And he knew it had to bide its time. He drank water because he would drink wine later with men who trusted wine to solve their shortcomings. He did not plan to be solved. "Do not show them the dragon first," Doran said. He had walked farther than he ought to have for a man whose joints were an evening away from complaining. He did not wince. He did not give pain its dignity. Let him be real in their minds before they are allowed to make him a theater. "I will do neither one nor the other," Oberyn said. "I will not hide him as if ashamed. I will not introduce him as my favorite trick. He is not a play. He is a fact." He smiled and bent and kissed his brother's brow as he had done sometimes when they were young and Oberyn had been feeling uncharacteristically tender toward a boy who would not run because he had been made to carry a kingdom in his bones. "Do not worry. I will let you interrupt me at least once." "I do not have the breath for more," Doran said. "Use the one." The palanquin for Doran was littered in bright cloth, not to comfort him. He hated being cradled, but to show that this carrying was not an indignity. It was his refusal to let the world teach him to be small. He arranged his face not to tremble when they lifted him. Ario walked at his left and Ilaria at his right and Tyene behind, because she was the one who would put a hand to the palanquin and lift if a man's foot slipped. Oberyn walked in front, not because he liked to be first in line, but because he liked to be where the wind hit first. Highgarden's envoy was a man Oberyn would indeed have liked if liking were not a luxury the day could afford. He was big in the shoulders with a mouth that almost always looked as if it were remembering a joke and refused to tell it. His hair had been cut with the sort of at-home dignity handsome men inflict on themselves. His hands bore callus that did not come from writing. He wore green and gold with no vanity. He introduced himself as Ser Garland Tyrell, the Lady Olenna's nephew, and bowed with a politeness that did not pretend they were anything other than possible enemies who might be men at a table for a few hours. "You are less of a peacock than I expected," Oberyn said to him in greeting, not as an insult but as an observation a duelist makes about a stance. "And you are more polite than men have told me," Garland said, with a flash of teeth that was not a threat. "I am pleased twice." They sat under the lime trees, because Doran's suggestion had been taken and turned into a setting that would mean the conversation could not pretend to be about war alone. A long table had been laid with bread, olives, vegetable stews that suggested to men of the Reach that meat could be optional and still be a meal, salt-fried fish whose edges crackled and were to be eaten with fingers. The water in the long troughs shone like beaten tin where the last of the day fell on it. Boys and girls ran along the edges and pretended not to stare at men in green who smelled faintly of good soap and better promises. Garland sat without fidgeting. He put his back to a wall because he knew the game, and he made his chair look like a choice a contented man makes rather than the trick of a soldier. He set a pouch on the table with reverent care and withdrew from it a small flask sealed with green wax and a small packet in green paper and placed them in front of Doran, not Oberyn, because he understood the conversation had two throats. "From my aunt," he said. "The wine is from vines that suffered a dry season and learned patience. The oil is made from petals that hold their scent longer than they have a right to." Doran accepted both as a man accepts gifts he fully expects to repay twice over. "Give the woman my thanks," he said. "Tell her I remember when we were both young and she laughed during a sermon and did not apologize." Garland's mouth footnoted that memory with a smile. "I will tell her that," he said. "She will tell me you are lying, because she does not remember a time she was young. She says she was born old and it has suited her." They ate and did not talk at first about the thing that had made this little theater necessary. Oberyn tested Garland's willingness to be pleased by food, and Garland showed it with frankness. Oberyn told a story about a turtle that had lived in the water gardens for 30 years and had made 4 gardeners despise the job of cleaning its pool. He did not tell the story to make light of the day. He told it to let everyone remember they had lived other days. Ilaria watched and guided with 2 fingers on the table's slat, tapping when Oberyn's tongue was moving faster than his mind, tapping when Doran's patience was about to snap in a place where it would not be heard. When they spoke of the creature, it was Garland who approached it first, like a dancer who recognizes that the music has taken a turn and will not allow him to remain between steps. "It was said there would be a beast," he said, and looked not at Oberyn but at the water, as if appealing to the only god the Roiner would admit to is a god at all. "I have a boy. He is nearly 2. He likes to put his hand in my mouth because he thinks I store tricks there with my teeth. You understand that when I hear there is a creature that burns meat with breath, I look at my son and see his hand in air that is made of fire." Oberyn placed his palm flat on the table and kept it there until the heat of his own skin had his full attention. "I do," he said. "I have daughters. A dozen people who would like to see me as a man who has forgotten how to be careful learn otherwise every day when I turn a corner and they are there, reminding me that I am not merely the man who used to dance with knives. I am not mocking your fear. I share it. I dare it to instruct me." Garland nodded. He poured wine as if the pouring of wine were a sentence that is supposed to slow a conversation so every word finds its place. "I am not her. To threaten you with a king who does not like being reminded that other men have voices," he said. "I am here to tell you that the Reach looks south when it is worried and looks north when it is greedy. Today it is worried and greedy both. If you mean to be a king, name how you will be a neighbor." "I will be a boundary," Oberyn said. He kept his voice mild. "I will be a thornier thing to take than anyone else you might try to steal. I will be a protector to those inside my boundaries so ferociously that you will decide, as a matter of comfort, to keep your interests where they can be served without picking splinters out of your tongues. That is the shape of a neighbor I can be." Garland cut his bread with a knife that had seen real service and was proud of it. "I can sell that sentence to my aunt," he said. "She will say it is too pretty to be wholly true and not ugly enough to be wholly false. She will say you are asking her to admire you. She will say she is flattered and suspicious. I am asking her to leave me alone long enough to make the thing I have begun into the thing that will be useful to everyone," Oberyn said. "And I am flattering her because she is an old woman who has earned flattering. I do not lie to women like her. It is a waste of her time." Doran coughed softly, and the line of the conversation bent around that sound. "Your aunt will also want to know if we intend to send men up the Prince's Pass with carpets and baskets and knives," he said. "She will want to know numbers of boys and dates on paper and who will be allowed to ride in the wagons and who must walk. She will want to know if my brother's claim means we will one day burn wheat and call it necessary." It pleased Oberyn to watch the light shift on Garland's face. This one was not a fool. He had expected to be able to smile his way through a conversation with a man who lived on stories. He had not expected to be weighed by a man who knew his own value and was unwilling to be impressed into confession by charm. "She will," Garland said. "She will also want to know whether you will ever bring that creature to Highgarden to keep her roses warm on a cold morning. She will say it with a joke. She is not joking." Xerix appeared then, not because he had been commanded, but because he had heard a sound he did not yet understand and could not resist preferring understanding to comfort. He came slower than earlier in the day, his heat banked, his steps assured. When he reached the edge of the long pool, he paused as if greeting an equal, then lowered his head and took in air and let it out again in a ribbon of warmth that did not quite become smoke. The children were held to depths of stillness they did not know they had. A little girl's hand gripped a bench until her knuckles were not pink. Illyria's mouth imagined a smile and then did not bother. Garland's chair did not move. His hands did not curl. He looked in that whole way cowards do not know how to look because it includes oneself in the looking. "He is beautiful," he said with a regret that made the sentence unthreatening. "I do not mean it as flattery, and I do not mean it as a warning. It is simply true." He did not reach toward the creature, though the desire to touch was visible and human as thirst. Xerix came like heat to the place where Oberyn's hand had already decided to be. He pressed against the man's fingers as if the day had finally done one sensible thing. He glanced with a slow suspicion at the man in green and gold, then at the women to either side, then at the boys who had scuffed sand into little islands at the pool's edge. He opened his mouth and warmed a bowl of sauce that had gone cool during the conversation and looked pleased with himself in the stupid animal way all creatures look pleased when they have done a small task without being told. The sauce smelled better. It also now contained a bit of ash. Nymeria rolled her eyes and stirred it as if she had been planning ash all along. "You have answers," Garland said to Oberyn when the breath that had been held by 100 people released and the day became again something ordinary people could pretend to own. "You also have a child with teeth. Keep teaching him to soften. Do not let him think that because the world is hot in your hands you are allowed to be cruel." "You and I agree on more than I would have predicted," Oberyn said, letting his laughter show not as mockery but as an ease his body chose for itself. "Will your aunt agree with either of us?" "No," Garland said. "She will make her own set of agreements with herself and then tell us whether she intends to keep them." He tipped his cup and regarded the wine as if it had something to say. "But she will not come with armies to make your women afraid. Not yet. She will send fruit and optics and letters that smell of things we cannot grow. She will send me back and make me tell her what you smelled like. Goats and pride," Illyria said, before Oberyn had thought to answer. And Garland's laugh made 3 of the children at the pool laugh too without knowing why. By the time the plates had been cleared and boys had been told twice that yes, they could run now, they had sat and breathed the day as people breathe a story they know will not end where it appears to end. The light went a richer yellow. The shadows grew confident. Ario moved a pace to his left to remain between the man with the green sash and the place where a stone in the wall had once fallen out and been badly replaced. He did it without appearing to have moved at all. Doran's face had taken on the pale, smudged look of a man who will pay tonight for having decided to live today. He did not complain. He had not allowed himself luxury and would not begin now. When the Highgarden men stood, their courtesy fell into the space between politeness and admiration with the accuracy of a stone thrown by a boy who has been practicing against a wall that does not return H. Is stones. They bowed to Doran and to Illyria and to the sand snakes one by one, not lingering on any because lingering is a sort of disrespect. Garland held Oberyn's gaze just long enough to say a thing he did not say aloud and never would, because men have their limitations and their honor. Then they left the water gardens with their hands not straying to their swords, and Sunspear let them be watched without jeer, because no one this day wanted to be remembered for being the fool who turned courtesy into an accident. Ario followed at a distance that made him look like a choice rather than an obligation. He watched men's heads. He watched hands. He watched a single servant who had the posture of a man who had once carried a sword and had been punished for liking it too much. This man tripped once with a plate of dates and apologized too quickly and glanced once too often at a passage where the plaster had been patched by a mason who had drunk 3 cups the night before. Ario made a note in his body of where that man's knife might be and decided not to take it today. He told himself a story of how, if the knife had been drawn, he would have set his spear to meet it and then twisted his wrist and made the man drop his blade, not because he was a magician but because he was a patient, stubborn man who knew what wood in his hand could be made to do. He let the story go untested. The man with the servant's hands left with the others and did not look back. Supper's aftertaste lingered. The next morning, the dragon woke with a temper and tried to set a length of woven rush matting on fire because it had snagged a claw. Oberyn let him attempt it until the matting had smoked and failed and the dragon's spite had spent itself. He then cut the matting cleanly with a knife and picked the bit away with slow fingers and made no jokes. Xerix let his anger go with the sudden indifference the very young can manage and stalked off to stare at a lizard who had made an error and climbed a pillar. A little later, he came back and made a small sound that might have been apology and curled his weight against Oberyn's ankle with a specificity that implied claim rather than affection. Oberyn did not mind. Claim would do. Affection was for men who had time to be lonely. Doran waxed a letter with a seal he had never used for a thing like this and wrote words that had more caution in them than ink and sent them north, to a place where flowers taught people to pretend that winter was other people's problem. He then lay down as if he had tripped, because pride can carry a man only so far before his body says something rude. Tyene sat in the chair by his bed and counted the breaths between coughs with a professional interest that would have made Oberyn worry if he had not known she counted everything. She fed him water with a spoon and made a face when he swallowed like a man being punished. He looked at her and smiled with his eyes. He did not waste breath on thanks. They both knew what they were doing. Ilaria went into the city without guards, because guards are a statement and she preferred to make different ones. She bought dates from a woman whose daughter had entertained Oberyn for a season and did not look away. She bought thread from a man who would die in the next sandstorm because he had decided to be too brave in the wrong direction. She bought a handful of coriander because she liked the way the smell stuck to her fingers until the afternoon had ended. She paid too much when it would make a point and exactly enough when that would. She did not ask for any woman's loyalty. She asked for their attention and paid for it and then made sure the attention had someplace good to go. Sarella wrote with a patience that had come to her only when she taught herself to carve time into pieces. Measurements, dates, locations of moles on Xerix's belly, the number of breaths he took in a stretch of 1 minute while he slept. She engraved into her own head the way the fat around his shoulders had changed texture, from soft dough to something more like meat, and then wrote that down too so it did not get improved by memory later. She drew diagrams of harnesses and talked to the men who worked brass and leather, and when they frowned and told her that the thing could not be made so because a dragon is not a horse, she asked them how they knew what a dragon was, since they had never made one, and then they laughed and tried what she suggested. Obara took boys out to the dunes and made them run until their lungs remembered they had tasks. She taught them to roll with a fall, to hit men's shins with the edge of a shield in a move that was considered dishonorable and worked every time, to pry a grip loose with their teeth if they had lost both hands to bad luck or good disarming. She sneered at tears and flirted with a baker's son and then flirted with his mother, and when the boys at her back laughed too loud and lifted their chins, she knocked one into the sand with the flat of her spear and reminded him that vanity is a hole you dig and then forget to fill until you break your ankle. Nymeria cultivated gossip as if it were a garden. She made a map of which men in green had looked longest at which corridor, which had asked where the stair to the kitchens came out, which had commented on the thickness of the walls or the thinness of the doors. Not because they would attack, because people made stories from what they noticed. She told those stories to Oberyn in the bath, and he listened and preferred the one about the young man with the scar down one cheek who had asked 3 times where the baby turtles were kept and had been disappointed when told they had been released last season. That one is either dangerous because he knows how to disarm women, Nymeria concluded, or safe because he is not pretending to enjoy turtles for politics. Either way, he is mine if I want him. Everyone is yours if you want them, Obe. Rin said, chin tipped back, eyes closed against the ceiling, because the ceiling had nothing to offer him but plaster and the occasional insect. Try wanting less. Your hands will thank you when you cannot lift your bracelets. The wind shifted, which in Dorne means more than it does in other places. It came in from the west with a taste of dust that had known wheat once and had been taught to be less. The day that followed the supper smelled of old cloth and new thunderstorms that would not arrive. Men wore hats for show and found themselves grateful for them in the first hour. Women put water at doorways and watched cats drink it and thought about the way time moved when it insisted on being noticed. In the mid-afternoon, Xerxes did what Oberyn had been waiting for with a patience he had had to teach himself not to waste. He climbed a pile of tiles engineering had left where a wall had half collapsed and been repaired by men who thought a pile of tiles looked like the future and had then been called to something else before they had used it. He looked out over the yard and let his tail make a figure 8 as if he were writing his name on the air. He set his hind legs and offered his front talons to the world and beat his wings with an earnestness that made no one laugh. He leaped. For a breath he clung to a plank of air. For 2 he believed that the world was under him and would remain there as long as he wanted it to. For a 3rd the wind did not care to keep seeing him. He dropped like a laugh that had misjudged its place. Oberyn did not move. He wanted to but did not. Xerxes hit sand and slid and did not cry out because dragons do not know what humiliation is called, only that it is a sister to pain. He lay perfectly still and made the courtyard hold still with him. He let mortification be a kind of death and then, like any creature meant to live past the first season that could kill him, he rose. He hissed at the sand as if it had been an insult. He climbed the tile pile again, slower this time. "Do not help him," Ilaria said, not because Oberyn would but because she needed to say it for the child she had once been, the one with skinned knees and no mother, the one who had learned that some falls must be kept, not given away to men who wanted to be noble. "I will not," Oberyn said. He felt his own bones remember falls. He felt the times he had landed without style and had still made the next move with grace. He wanted this for his creature. He believed the world was full of men who had been ruined by being rescued. Xerxes leaped again. The arc was better. He caught a sly stick of wind and let it slide under his wings and carried it for half the yard before it threw him. He landed on his belly with a soft thump that made Oberyn's teeth ache in sympathy. He got up. He did it again. The 3rd time, he did not so much fly as he did not fall. It was enough. It exhausted him. He walked away as if bored and drank noisily at a dish Tyene had just filled and looked over his shoulder to make certain the right people had been watching. They had. He put his head on the warm stone and let sleep take him like a story he had not intended to listen to and could not help loving. At twilight, Oberyn wrote a letter he did not intend to send. He wrote it on coarse paper with the cheap ink that leaves a smudge on the finger and stains the cuticle and is difficult to get out. He did this on purpose because he wanted to feel the labor of words. He wrote to a woman who had once slapped him in the water gardens for making a joke during her grief and had then allowed him to feed her a slice of orange without crying. He told her nothing she did not know. He told her everything she had taught him without intending to teach. He folded the paper and set it in his belt, and sometime later in the night, when he and Ilaria went walking and found the sea at the bottom of the world breathing like an animal with a wound, he took the letter out and lit it and let it burn his fingers to the first joint before he let it go into the dark. Ilaria kissed the place the flame had touched. Xerxes watched them and did not understand. He would understand everything worth understanding if he lived long enough. That love burns. That loss makes a shape a man can lean against. That kingdoms are built of the small lies we tell ourselves at night that allow us to get up in the morning and make better truths. At moonrise, Ariohoda walked the walls alone. He liked the sound his feet did not make. He counted the steps because that is what he does when his mind wants to run and he refuses to let it. He thought about the man with the servant's hands and how he had tripped with the plate of dates. He thought about where the break would come if he were that man and wanted to send a message to someone to say, "Come now and bring knives." He thought about how to meet it. He did not imagine glory. He did not picture himself red-handed in some noble pose. He saw, with a bitter sweetness he had allowed into his life as other men allow wine, an old man taught to hold the weight of a house with his back and shoulders until the young remembered how to stand up. He was content with that picture. He had a scar on his left knee from a fight no one else remembered. He rubbed it once and then let it remind him, as it always did, that there is no victory that pays enough for the pleasure of imagining it in advance. It might have been a quiet night, quiet in that way Dorne knows and other places do not, with the sound of little stones shifting in the heat and little insects negotiating in their high voices, with a woman singing somewhere 3 courtyards away because someone she loved was at sea and she needed to tell the sea her terms. It became slightly less quiet when the old maester of Sunspear, who had intended to die of ink and not of excitement, arrived at the door to Oberyn's room with an object wrapped in a soft cloth. As carefully as Ilaria sometimes wrapped her hair when she grew bored of letting it fall. "I hate magic," the old man said conversationally, "which is why I have brought you this object that men who pretend to hate magic admire in their private rooms when the door is bolted." He set the wrapped bundle down and undid it with hands that shook with age or contempt or both. The thing inside was a glass lens, a simple, much-chipped Myrish focusing tool, which made a candle flame seem brighter and nearer than it was. "Do not let the creature look into it," the old man advised. "Do not let it look at the creature, but look through it at the world and see whether it makes anything different by being used." Oberyn held the lens up and watched how it made Ilaria's eye a strange, wet planet for a breath, watched how it made the curve of Xerxes' scaled jaw look like armor built into the world by accident. He smiled and put it down. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me," the old man said sourly. "I do not choose sides. I only choose work. Your work seems to have found you. Go to it." As the lens of the night cleared and hardened into that gray that feels like the inside of a pearl, he went back to the sand where the day before had begun. He stood facing the desert and the little ridge of broken rock beyond which the world descended to a long, unkind plain. He let the cool bite an inch of his skin and no more. He heard the dragon behind him in the soft scuff that even claws make when they are still small enough to think it matters how quiet they are. He did not turn. "Today," he said, "you will take a little of what the air owes you and you will give it back without complaint when it takes it. You will stop at wanting the taking to be enough. You will ask it for something more." Xerxes came to stand level with his knee, eyes at the height of a hound's. He regarded the line of the horizon with the suspicion of a creature that has yet to learn the meaning of distances. He exhaled, and a thread of smoke wrote a sentence Oberyn pretended to be able to read. He made a noise that had no human word. He lowered his head and, with a seriousness so complete it became funny, chased a beetle 10 paces and swallowed it and made a face and decided that would never do again. "You will learn discernment," Oberyn said to him solemnly. "Start with beetles. Perhaps the reach would wait. Perhaps it would not. Perhaps a clever man in Old Town would light a candle and decide that this was the night to burn one that had not been burned for 100 years, and be pleased to find that it took the light selfishly and did not share. Perhaps a woman in King's Landing would put on a dress with too many pearls and leave one in the bed of a man she had gone to in order to learn whether pearls break when they are pressed between teeth. And perhaps she would take no lesson from that experiment that she could have used for the good of anyone but herself. Perhaps in the Summer Islands someone would tell a story about a man with a dragon and gloss over the goat, because stories like goats only when they are symbols and not when they are meat. Oberyn cared and did not care. He had the next hour at hand, and sometimes the next hour is all a man should pretend to own. He took the chain from the peg he had put in the wall and set it aside without touching it to Xerxes' neck. The dragon lifted his head, then lowered it, accepting for the moment that liberty would be granted only while it amused a man. He walked out onto the sand with his man at his shoulder, and the sun lifted its face not because it meant anything by it but because it has always done that here and will do it when men's names are dust. There was, in a courtyard in Sunspear, a tile laid where the sun strikes at noon each day, a picture of a woman on a ship with something asleep at her feet. There was a boy with ash stripes on his cheeks who would have to decide before he was 12 whether to be brave or careful and which of the two is the better lie to tell yourself about your own life. There was a goat whose scars had begun to heal and whose hair had started to grow back in embarrassing tufts that made children laugh and made its owner love it more. There was a letter floating to some shore that would never be picked up because it had only ever been meant to exist on heat and then not exist. There was a man called King who woke up each hour to touch the warm side of a dangerous thing and tell it in words that were not words that it could live. And if it lived, he could become the man he had once promised himself not to be and hoped, secretly, to become. He put his hands on his hips. He breathed. In the space between breath and beat, the world balanced. It had the look of something that might decide to be kind. He did not trust it. He did not need to. "Come," he said again today, to Dragon, to his own, and stepped forward until the sand accepted his weight and then gave it back in a way that permitted walking. He walked. The dragon followed like intention. The city lifted its head. Far out at the line where the sea wears its flimsy veil, a gull laughed with the arrogance of creatures who have outlived the importance men grant them in stories. The sun began its work. The wind remembered its tune. The beginning went on beginning.